My name is Polly Ray, and I lived at LAMA in 1976, 77, and 78 with my 3 young children. I was always very spiritually inclined and interested. I had been a religion major in college, and before I moved to LAMA, I was very involved in a church community, and had things happened. I had to change the course of my life. I got a van, put my 3 kids in it, spent a year trying to figure out how I wanted to lead my life. I needed to support my children. I didn't want to spend a lot of time away from them. I could have had a professional job in a city, which I had had before that, in finance, and I wasn't motivated to do that. I wanted to spend time with the kids. I had to feed them, but I also wanted to do something that was meaningful to me. And so living in a spiritual commune felt like a very good fit for our family situation at that time. And we visited many communes before we found LAMA. And one of the things I loved about it was, and Asha referred to this morning, that it was equally balanced between men and women, and there wasn't some man who thought he was somebody special issuing the orders. It was, everything was by consensus, and real sense of community here. So it fit us, and what I think I wanted to learn from LAMA and did learn was to have my spiritual practice permeate every moment of my life. So it wasn't separate. It was really how I lived. At the time I came to LAMA, and I still feel this way about LAMA, I feel like LAMA is like a lighthouse on the hill, and it's this bright light, and people come here because they have a light. We have a light in our heart, and it reflects with the light of the lighthouse. And when we were living at LAMA, every Sunday in the warm weather was Visitors' Day, and every Sunday we would get 100 people come up here and be fed by and nourished by that light. And I feel like what LAMA did was, it was like a battery charger for all of us, for the light that we were. And I think it still is. And I regret that they don't have more Visitors' Days now, because that was so meaningful to all the people that came up here. And many of the residents came from those visits, those Sunday visits.
What do you envision happening for LAMA in the next 50 years?
I hope it can be, now that we've recovered from the fire, which was traumatic and took a shifting direction for LAMA, I hope it can continue to be a lighthouse. I hope it can be open more often to the public and more accessible, and really be a beacon. That's what I see for LAMA.
What stands out for you as something important to share with future LAMA beings?
What stands out? Well, I'd like to tell a little story about something I learned here at LAMA. Is that okay? Because we were just having this interview with Ram Dass, and the first Ram Dass camp that I was at was in 1976, and it was the second year that they had done there had been a summer program here, and it was huge. There were 200 people here for that period of time. We had a large summer community, and then all the retreatants came, and none of us had ever dealt with feeding 200 people 3 meals a day for 2 weeks. And one morning, I was in charge of the kitchen for that camp, and one morning somebody who didn't have very much cooking experience decided to make a potato dish that had to be baked in the oven. So he put the potatoes in the oven, and we're all gathering, way ahead of course, and we're all gathering for breakfast. And in those days, we ate around the picnic tables outdoors, and everybody, when the bells would ring at the appropriate time, would come and form a big circle, and there are 200 people with Ram Dass in this enormous circle, and we would sing, as we did this evening, a beautiful blessing for the food, and we sang, and then they would bring the food out and place it on the table. But this morning, we sang our chant, and no food came. And so after a moment or a minute or two, Ram Dass started another song, and we sang another song, and we looked at the kitchen door, nothing was coming, and we sang another song, and we ended up singing for it could have been 45 minutes. And we're with a pause between each song, looking at the kitchen door. And finally, finally there was a pause and the food came out. The potatoes were done. They'd taken much longer to cook than anybody had anticipated. And Ram Dass, in his beautiful way, said, "I'll bet there are some people here who think we were waiting for the breakfast." And what I learned, which I took with me throughout my life, was it's be here now. The moment was so beautiful. We were so enjoying that moment. And I think of that morning. It was such a teaching for me. I think of it so often when I'm in a line in the grocery store or I'm waiting for a red light, and I can be waiting for the light or frustrated line, or I can just be there now. And I think I've been happier my entire life because I know I have that choice and I can choose to just be here now. And I think that kind of teaching that comes from an everyday experience is the sort of miracle that happens so often at LAMA. My life after LAMA, when I left here, after 3 years at LAMA, I moved down to Taos, and there were no jobs, and I moved into a church, which was a very natural move from LAMA Foundation, and started a little meditation group. There were about 10 of us meditating. None of us could find jobs, and so we talked about what we wanted to do, and we decided that we didn't care what kind of work we created, but we wanted to practice right livelihood. And the first thought was to open a hospice, because I had been studying with a local doctor, with Andrea Levine, who hadn't yet met Stephen at that time, on how to take care of dying people. But Taos didn't need a hospice. It was mostly Hispanic and Native people who cared for their dying people at home at that time. So we decided to open a restaurant, because there's a lot of opportunity for service in a restaurant. And it was a very alternative restaurant, because I had lived at LAMA and because these were all and the whole meditation group was the first group of 10 employees at the restaurant. And we would start every day with a circle, like tuning. We'd hold hands and be grateful for whatever, and people would say whatever they had to say. Everybody arrived at the same time so we could do this. Everything was done by agreement, except because I was the owner, I had veto power. But everything was done by the recipes and everything we did. Nobody could have just one job. Everybody had to have 2 jobs so that they had compassion for the people in the other jobs. And we were always having these meetings talking about, how do we practice right livelihood? What do we do with the compost? What do we do with this, with that, and the other thing? And many Lama beings came to work there. Mary Ann worked there. Vadon Baker was a baker. Pamela Rigsby, who's now known as Fatima, was the first fabulous cook. Many Lama beings came and worked at this restaurant over the years. And it was a very magical place that lasted for 35 years. It was kind of the center of Taos society in a way. And as time went on and we got new people in, and I had to introduce them to the philosophy of what we were doing there at the restaurant, I remember the thing that I always said to them is, remember, we're serving love disguised as food. And they got it. But the spiritual practice and the spiritual life that I lived here, and learning to live it 24 hours a day, is still a practice for me.
My name's ELAINE Jihada Sutton. I don't use the Jihada that much these days. I came here in 1982 with Asha. I lived in a community at that time with her in Virginia, and all the women came to a women's gathering at LAMA with Zuleika. And I stayed. I stayed for the whole rest of the summer. And I thought, this is where I want to live. And I knew it at the Albuquerque airport. I had an idea. And then we stayed in Santa Fe, and that was even more beautiful. And then we came up here, and I thought, home. So I stayed for the whole rest of the summer as a summer staff. Then I went back to Virginia and sort of got my life organized and packed up. And I came back here the next spring, and I stayed I never spent the whole winter. I stayed from May until September for the next 10 years or so. Because my children were in school in Santa Fe. It was just how I had to do it. But I was the kitchen master and the garden master and those kinds of things. And the thing for me about LAMA was that I finally found a place where I felt like I had enough space. The community was very spacious. The land was very spacious. I felt that the balance between the huge amount of land here and how rustic it was and the kind of intimacy that was created at LAMA was just the thing that fed my soul. I've been in commune since I was 19. I started a macrobiotic farm after living with Michio Kushi, and we lived and grew all our own food and did all of that. So back to the land is a thing that I was clear about. But the way that it happened here at LAMA and the land itself really spoke to me. And really the most important thing for me that happened here was my integration into the world, into the wild world, into the natural world. I would go up into the mountains for weeks at a time and sleep on the ground and visit with the bear and the deer, and I just felt like, oh, I have a place. The world is really our place also, and not just the animals and the trees, but people can be part of it. And that's, for me, it was very powerful that I learned being here. And I take people on backpacking trips from LAMA for 10 days up into the mountains, and where we write and do poetry. And anyway.
What do you see as LAMA's most vital contribution to the world?
I want to say the person who keeps the heart during our meetings. The person who just sits in the middle of chaos, in the middle of any kind of meeting, in a meditative place, and anytime they feel the energy is wonky, they just ring a little bell. And I feel like that is the reminder that the whole world needs. Okay, stop arguing, stop talking, get into your heart, and see what's really there. And I've worked on psych wards. I'm a therapist. I worked on psych wards for 10 years, and in the middle of the most unusual situations during group therapy, I always had somebody who held the heart. And anyone can do it. You can take that anywhere in the world, is what I think.
What do you envision happening for LAMA in the next 50 years?
Well, more of the same, a few more outhouses, some more little spaces, more indoor spaces. I see that the population, the larger population of LAMA, a lot of us are growing older. And where I used to just fling a bedroll on the ground, I like a little bed now. I'm almost 70 and I get it. It seems it could be a tiny bit more comfortable for people. But the role that it plays, I don't want to ever see it get fancy and like a resort or any of those things. I see that this wedding of complex mind and heart with simple living is a balm for everybody's soul, or everybody who comes here.
What stands out for you as something important to share with future LAMA beings?
Surrender. I would say come here and just surrender. Whatever your idea of yourself or who you are or how important or what you're going to do in the world, to enter into this community that's been forming for so many years now, and to just find your way into the stream of what is. And the easiest way to do that is just to surrender all your stuff and jump in with your whole heart.
Is there anything else you'd like to say to the future?
I would say that this is a place to save your life, yours and everyone around you.
My name is Rick Markov. There are many events and experiences prior to what I'm going to talk about, even during and certainly after. I got out of the Army in the fall of 1970. In the winter spring of 71, I came to work to LAMA. I found it to be a very healing place, which I needed, and an experience that changed my life, literally, for the next number of years and beyond. It helped open my heart, which is still not there. It gave me acceptance of many things, many people, many religions and practices, experiences that I hadn't had before. I appreciated the time I was here, and I came again. I was out of state, and then back here again in the spring of '73, and taught with the Donna Housley LAMA Associated School, summers here and teaching down there and back and forth during the school year. I then left to do other things, including teaching, which I was not going to do as a career, and ended up being a school principal, but that's not what I want to talk about. What I do want to say to the people at LAMA and people associated with LAMA is that I came as a incomplete vessel, and with something to offer. I don't know. It could have been. I hope I did. I was known as the guy who did karma yoga all the time. I probably still am doing a lot of that. I was glad I could contribute to the success of LAMA and the work of the people here. Teaching in Taos, it's interesting, I'll tell you that in a second. In the Army, I was known as the hippie lieutenant, and that's because friends had painted all over my duffel bag the night before I left San Francisco. When I was teaching in Taos, I was known as the straightest hippie we ever met. So I mentioned that because there was a meeting just previously, and people talked about hippies and so forth. The thing that I'd like to say to people at LAMA and associated with LAMA is I mentioned not being the perfect vessel, and especially now with multiple deployments, need something. I found what I needed. It was intuitive, and it started an adventure here and elsewhere after my experience. Be open to those who may come with you with that or some other trauma in their life that needs a healing. It worked for me. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Susan Ross. I was a LAMA bean way back when I was fresh out of college. Came out to New Mexico to be an artist. Was in Taos, and Steve Durkee came into the post office, said, "You're an artist, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I have a friend coming back from India to work on a book. It's going to be an illustrated book, and maybe you'd like to come up to LAMA and help out." And I said, "Sounds great." So that's what I did. And I ended up here, I think it was the very end of '69 or the very beginning of '70. And I was here through the making of the book and after. And then I went back to being an artist and onto my adventures. And I've had a deep, deep place in my heart for LAMA ever since. It's definitely one of my homes. LAMA was like my postgraduate education that I didn't know was happening at the time, but it connected me to a lot of my own family history, a lot of the kinds of feelings I had already been expressing and working with the land. Certainly gave me a variety of chances to experience a lot of the spiritual traditions that I might have explored a little bit academically in college, but was actually taught meditation by my mother, and so it was like felt like home and a place to explore. So that was a good thing. I feel like LAMA was a series of what in my life I consider a shower of blessings, true blessings that I had no idea where they came from or why I was in a situation where I could be here and learn what I learned. But I don't think as I told Ramdas the other day on the call, I've been told by thousands of people at this point that Be Here Now changed their life, and I think, well, making of Be Here Now certainly changed mine in ways that I can't imagine. I mean, I would have had other adventures and other paths, but this one was a good one.
What do you see as LAMA's most vital contribution to the world?
LAMA is a place where people can learn the kinds of skills that I think we're all going to need going forward to continue to have a planet that is available to us to be cared for and enjoyed and together. So that's what I'm all about. And so LAMA's purpose and my purpose in the world are pretty similar, and I love that LAMA does it so well, has gotten out, and will continue, I hope, to do that.
What do you envision happening for LAMA in the next 50 years?
I'd like for this piece of land, as the earth goes through the changes that are already happening, this piece of land to continue to be cared for in a sacred way, because I feel that there will be places on the planet which will become places of renewal and resilience. And we've already seen the kinds of changes that can happen just in 20 years of recovery from disasters of various kinds. And I think that that will be a very important skill for people to learn, how to be resilient. So I hope in 50 years there are more resilient people on the planet as a result of LAMA's existence. And there may be various ways that we can be helpful to people and benefit the planet in doing that. So I hope that LAMA's doing that in 50 years.
What stands out for you as something important to share with future LAMA beings?
Not to be afraid of trying something that might feel uncomfortable, to not see obstacles as anything but opportunity. That's what my teachers have always told me. And over time I've figured out that they actually know what they're talking about really quite well. So I said, just don't be afraid, be open and curious and go for it, and you'll learn something, you know, whether it's here or someplace else, but here is a great place to learn.
Do you have any anecdotes you care to share about your time at LAMA, about teachers you've met, nuggets of wisdom that have stuck with you your whole life?
Yeah. As I say, I had great parents. I mean, I had unusual parents. They came to visit me here. I wrote letters to them. Some of those letters my father kept them, and I reread them recently, and it was like, wow, I've been doing the same things all my life and learning from amazing people all my life. And so this place led me to my first little Joe Gomez, who really pointed the way in a very strong way to me that was very helpful. And then I met Ram Dass here. I met numerous teachers came through, and the thing that I liked was that they were ordinary people. They, you know, with failings and foibles. It's like, okay, they're like me, but they're different too. And so, what can I learn from that? And so, I've just felt so blessed because that's happened again and again, and through time, my Tibetan teachers have really held steady with saying, you can do it. You know, the only thing getting in your way is you. And so just keep going and you'll do fine. And I think that that's what if there's anything I want to pass on to anybody, that would be it, is just listen and observe and then try stuff out and don't be afraid of what happens, because you'll find your path that way. I just am it's so good to come back here and find that it's still growing, it's still moving along, it's still on a path that I think is going to be useful for all of us over time. So I just feel blessed. Thank you so much.
My name is Marianne Matheson. I came to LAMA on a visit in April of 1978. And it was actually kind of a fluke. I'd read Be Here Now. I knew about the LAMA Foundation, and I lived about 5 hours north up in Colorado. But I had an opportunity to visit riding coattails with a friend, and she was coming to LAMA to discuss doing a work trade in the summer for the Ram Dass camp. And I hadn't heard the Sufi expression about a Sufi doesn't go where he's not invited. So I just rode along because I thought we could catch up on the commute. But when we got to the land, I just felt, when I walked onto the land and Lama Central, and I saw people walking around pursuing this very simple life, I thought, this is what I was looking for, and I didn't even know I was looking for it. And in hindsight, what I think is this was a case of, in the Fourth Way work, it's said that each person has within him a magnetic center that recognizes an esoteric school. And I didn't know I was looking for an esoteric school, but I think my immediate attraction to this place and the land was on a level that I understood that my next cycle of work was to happen here. So I left, but I came back for a couple more visits before I came convicted that I really wanted to come and live here. I didn't see any other opportunity. So I came back in the fall of 1978, and I said I wanted to live here for a 12-month period because I recognized that 6 months of the year were an in-breath, and the community was closed for intensive practice, which I felt intuitively was my medicine that I needed that time in my life. And then 6 months of out-breath of hospitality as a retreat center in the summer. So I wanted to experience the whole gamut. And as it turned out, I ended up spending 6 years until 1984, because every year was just richer and richer and juicier, and we had, I can't think of a different situation where you just stay in one place and this parade of incredible teachers from all different traditions came and shepherded us and shared with us. And I couldn't relinquish that until I felt my curriculum was finished here. So it took 6 years. So Lama represented a real reboot in my life of, Lama had a vision statement to serve as an awakening, a place for the awakening of consciousness, both individual and collective. And also the element of conscious intentionality was so much a part of the life. And I took that on, and that transformed the vector of my life. Values about professions, money, what I needed, what I wanted. So it was an invaluable time in my life. And I didn't realize this until I'd been gone from Lama for a few years. And I don't think the residents are aware of it when we're here. But what did I do when I was here? I worked in the garden a lot, growing food at high altitude, growing flowers at high altitude. I learned how to cook vegetarian food for large groups of people. And I was in charge of hermits for a few years, so that I was very aware of what in the Benedictine tradition they're calling radical hospitality, where you greet each person as Christ. So when we're living here, we're just doing the work of the foundation, doing whatever needs to be done. But in the course of that, we collect all these skills. People who had to be pressed into being treasurer learned how to become bookkeepers. We all became vegetarian chefs capable of feeding large groups of people. And I realized several years after I'd left that everything I was doing in my life was an outgrowth of the skills that I had acquired living at LAMA, which never occurred to me at the time. And we don't credit that while we're living here, but you see this over and over again with the people who've left LAMA, that they take the skills they acquired here and that becomes their way of life. So one thing that also happened here that was very important was we did community exchange with a monastery up near Aspen in Old Snowmass. It's a Trappist monastery, and the exchange happened because the abbot from there came to assist Brother David Steindl-Rast when he did a retreat here on gratitude in 1978. And subsequently, he kept wanting to bring his fellow brethren from the monastery, it's the small house, he wanted them to come here to experience the community. He said, it's nothing like our community, but the spirit is very similar, and you should experience this community. But it's a hard sell for a field trip to get a spiritual community to want to visit another spiritual community. But they came, and that set up years and ongoing to this day interchange between that community and LAMA. And Father Thomas Keating, who retired there, having finished 23 years as abbot of the Mother House back east, met LAMA up at the monastery and subsequently was invited down here to share teachings. And when he was here, he realized at the ISC, he might be able to offer some retreats and have LAMA people available to staff them. And in that way, in 1983 and 1984, he did the first 2 retreats in the format and model that he's still doing up at the monastery in Colorado. And Pat Johnson and I were involved with those retreats. And Pat and I just retired from the retreat work in 2016. So that was 1985 to 2016. We were involved in that work. So that was an outgrowth of mine. That wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been here at LAMA.
What do you see as LAMA's most vital contribution to the world?
LAMA's there's so many contributions that LAMA has, but I remember a particular moment. I was the Shabbat cook on a Friday night in the old kitchen. It was during Ramadan, and over at the Intensive Studies Center, Ramadan was being observed. The fast was being broken as the sun was going down just before. And in the dome directly below me, there was a retreat with Zalman Schachter. And there were these Jewish songs coming up to me from the dome, and through the woods and across the way was the call to prayer in this most peaceful, beautiful setting. And I thought, my God, if it can happen here on Lama Mountain, it can happen in Jerusalem. So this, I think, is something that is a founding factor in Lama's coming into existence, this meeting of the ways, and people meeting people from other traditions and having dialogue and respect and partaking of the value of other people's traditions with just incredible respect and unity in this way that transcends any sectarianism. So I hope that this will always be something that Lama serves as a testament for. I'm hoping that LAMA will continue to be a place where people who have busy lives in more urban and different situations can come and experience what it feels like to live close on the earth. I can't emphasize how much that's a part of life at the foundation. We live close to the earth here. We care for the earth. The earth is supporting us, is healing us. If you live in a city and you work in an office, you might have to produce reports on the 1st or the 15th of the month to share with your work team. Here, the dates are going to be the new moon and the full moon. Everything has to do with the earth here on some level, and it was set up intentionally that way. And many people don't get the opportunity to live that way anymore. But even to visit here briefly, to touch that place that we all know from many generations back of what it's like to live close to a piece of earth and have it be where we know we belong and where our family belongs. It's a very unique experience, and that's one reason why the fire was so devastating for people in the community, because we experienced it so viscerally, because it was Lama Mountain that was burning up, and all the animals that surrounded our cabins, and it was a very, very painful experience. This is something that I have understood, that I learned at LAMA, and that is, you know, the community and a resident have mutual expectations and promises. And if a resident, for whatever reason, is becoming sort of flaky or taking energy away from the team, sort of, the first reaction of at least a certain part of the community is going to be to sort of want to expel them or punish them. There's some kind of punitive energy because they're not holding up their end of their bargain. And yet what I saw over and over again at LAMA is people cannot change unless they know at the deepest level that they are loved unconditionally. So people have to be included even more to the heart of the community to be able to address whatever it is that's making them act out in this compensatory fashion, because they, as so many of us are, not always 100% sure that we're loved unconditionally. So this works in any team, whether it's in an office or any team outing endeavor. There has to be this commitment to, first and foremost, accept people unconditionally, because after that, once people have that knowledge, anything is possible in the interpersonal realm. People are open to being corrected. Anything can happen after that. But without that, there's just defensiveness and blame, and it's not a good formula. I was reminded of this letter that I sent out after the fire happened at LAMA in 1996 on Cinco de Mayo. I just read an article in the local Taos paper which featured 50 years of the LAMA Foundation as a feature story in their magazine. And a quote from Asha reminded me of what I overheard this particular day. I came up to visit the foundation, my first visit after the fire. I overheard somebody comment, "We've lost a lot, but I'm realizing LAMA is a state of mind." So this is a letter that I sent out to everybody who was calling, all the people who cared so much about the LAMA Foundation and were sending money and calling, saying, what can we do? So these are just a couple of excerpts from that letter. Dear friends and family, I've just returned from the opening Sunday's Visitors' Day of the summer season at LAMA. Many, many people came. Some close family to celebrate LAMA's surviving the fire. Others more distant and curious well-wishers who wanted to see how people survive such a crisis. Some people came because they'd planned to come and live at LAMA for the summer, and they were persevering, albeit with trepidation. LAMA is alive. Parts of its 110 acres are blackened and razed, but the central core of the public buildings is miraculously preserved, down to the summer picnic tables and information blackboard for guests. I came away from this day feeling incredibly moved. LAMA is a state of mind. Before lunch, I traveled to corners and heights of the land, shooting a list of photos that had been given to me as needed to complete our photo record of destruction and loss. Tantalizing shots, some, of where burned areas licked up to perfectly preserved sites. When we gathered in the dome after lunch, we had some information sharing before we began Sufi dancing, and at the end of the sharing, a visitor, very filled with emotion, addressed all the residents and said, "Thank you for accepting this sacrifice so gracefully." And I realized in that moment that this is now also something that LAMA can share. It can model surviving annihilation and devastation. It reminds us that what we possess is not what can be lost in a fire. What we possess is the knowledge and faith that we exist only in this moment, with this breath, by grace. LAMA lost 20 of 29 structures by my count, but LAMA is a state of mind. When we circled up, there were so many folks we had to make 3 concentric circles, and we're still crowded in the dome. As the dance leaders gave instruction, my eyes went up to the ceiling and fixed on a portion of the ceiling blackened from a fire in the adjoining new room some 20 years ago. And all of a sudden, I felt the miracle that this building had been spared more than once for exactly this purpose. The purpose it was serving now, that we could join hands, drum and dance and chant the names of God and embrace the annihilation of the temporal and celebrate what transcends. What else could we want to be doing at LAMA? In what other building? This has always been its charism. Yes, we lost acres of climax forest and lots of buildings, but we can still offer our most powerful practice, LAMA as a state of mind. After all these years, it still comes back to be here now.
There we go, a big fat sexy kiss.
That's it.
Yeah, you got
It's a
it.
wrap.
Yeah, that's a wrap.